Small Grants Fund. And we're delighted to be able to award money for this this project. It's already received quite a lot of media attention, has real potential to improve the way in which we understand this phenomenon and respond to this phenomenon. So our presenters are going to speak for about half an hour. Professor Rose Broad from the University of Manchester Criminology Department and Dr. Caroline Miles from the same department, both just behind me through the window here. The project is the abuse of women runners, perceptions, experiences, and recommendations for policing. So I will hand over to Rose and Caroline.
Thanks very much, Jeff, and hi everybody. And yeah, just before we start, I'd like to thank the N8 for the funding and for all the support from GMP and from Merseyside and the other people on the steering group who've been really supportive for the project. So thank you for that. So yeah, Jeff's already introduced us, so that's who we are. So Caroline, is that in the slideshow view on presenter view? I can't see it as presenter view.
No, I can't see the slides at all. Can I?
I can see the slides.
Can everybody see the slides?
I can.
For some reason, I can't see the slides.
Oh, can you go to the next one or no?
It says that I'm sharing. No, I can't. I can't go to the next one because I can't see them. I don't understand what is going on. I'm so sorry. Do you know what? I'm going to share it a different way, how I did yesterday.
Okay.
I won't. Just bear with me one minute.
We have sharing problems.
Yeah. Right. Hopefully this will work. This is how I did it yesterday and it worked.
Yeah, it was fine yesterday.
Is that working now?
It's thinking about it. Yeah,
I can see the slide. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, it's okay. Right. No, good. All good. Thank you.
Now so I can change the slide. Yes.
Thank you. So to give a bit of context to the project, we wanted to we drew on the and obviously this has been an issue for longer than these show, but that we've had the same message really over at least 3 decades of asking for improvements to women's quality of life, which is obviously where this fits in. So we returning to Betsy Stanko's work in the 1990s, and this quote here that is looking at improving women's quality of life, being free from physical and sexual harassment. And then the second one is from the Greater Manchester Gender-Based Violence Strategy, and this quote by Andy Burnham, that women and girls shouldn't live in fear of going out. And you can see the same kind of call to action, the same kind of message in both of these quotes that highlights that we've been seeing the same thing over 3 decades, and that perhaps things haven't changed as much as we would hope. And also, I think both we want to emphasize here, because this is really important, both for the context of this research and also for what we wanted to do moving forward, that we're focused here on women's experiences of abuse, but that's not to suggest that it's women that need to change. And this is not about saying, you know, these are all the ways that women need to do things to be safe while they're running. And that actually, if women and girls' quality of life is to improve, if they're to feel free of fear of crime and to reduce violence and abuse, then it's boys' and men's behaviour that needs to change. And this is also reflected in the policy context, as many of you will know. In 2021, the National Police Chiefs Council and the College of Policing created a new violence against women and girls framework. And within this, 2 of the aims were particularly relevant for the current project, which is to improve trust in policing and create safer spaces, and then to understand the reasons that prevent women from reporting abuse. And when we had initial conversations with GMP and Merseyside, it was evident that these were also local priorities, and that both the force areas wanted to understand more about the patterns of abuse, the patterns of women's experiences, and then their reporting habits and the barriers to that reporting, and how they could contribute to this and create safer spaces and encourage women to report more. Attention to VAWG, to violence against women and girls, has shifted in recent years to focus on what is sometimes called low-level abuse, which I'm not using as a way to kind of make it seem not important, but it's sort of in contrast to more serious incidents, and has shifted to include violence in public spaces rather than just private. And obviously the acknowledgement of private abuse and violence is really important. But in recent years, we've seen this focus on VAWG in public spaces. And an example of that is the Safer Streets campaigns, which started in the aftermath of Sarah Everard's murder in March 2021. And amongst other things, the funding aims to improve the safety of public spaces for women and girls. In Greater Manchester, we've seen this also reflected in the Is This OK campaign, which we're just going to show a very brief clip of. So many of you may have seen that already, but we just wanted to highlight it here because it shows the kind of everyday nature of some of these incidents and some of these experiences and how ingrained they can be in women's experiences, particularly the first one where there's not really any interaction, but it's a kind of intimidating situation, and we'll return to that a bit later on. In terms of the academic literature and the existing research on this, there is very little. We answered a few questions early on in the kind of proposal process from reviewers and people that we spoke to about why focus on women runners and why they are a distinct group, which we think they are, and we think that they've got a set of needs that are different from other groups. They are often on their own, in more isolated spaces. They might wear fewer clothes that are tighter than other people, and they're in pursuit of a different kind of experience that is, you know, a kind of fundamental human right to be able to use public spaces for exercise. A small number of studies have found that women experience street harassment whilst running, and these are all actually from the perspective of sports related studies. So they're kind of looking at how that then affects women's participation in sport, which is obviously a really important point. And then more widely, it fits around the literature on wider issues of VAWG. So women and fear of crime. Women are more fearful of crime, despite being statistically less likely than men to be victims of crime in public places. And there's a few explanations have been put forward for this, but there's most agreement around the point that women's fear is often equated to a fear of sexual assault. And we'll return to that as well later on. Research on street harassment, so not particularly of runners, but just of women in general. For instance, the UK Office of National Statistics in 2022 highlighted that stalking and harassment rose from 27% to 45%, with women representing a significant proportion of these figures. And international self-report surveys based in the UK, the US, Australia and India indicate that women experience verbal and physical harassment between 77 and 87% on a daily basis. So this is something that is kind of an everyday experience for many women in a lot of research. There's a whole body of research on the harassment of women in the nighttime economy, which obviously is different a little bit from this, but still fits into the same kind of categories of behaviour. And the harassment of women in the nighttime economy is continually identified as a high incidence of sexual harassment in spaces where women are viewed in as hypermasculine environments, impacting on the way in which men behave and women are viewed, which I think also has a kind of reflection here on the way women are dressed and their participation. And then research on women's participation in sport shows that fewer women than men perceive sport as something that they can enjoy. The This Girl Can initiative highlighted that 2.4 men than women strongly agree that they enjoy sport and physical activity, and that the barriers include cost, self-image, concern about judgment, male centrism, and fears of physical and sexual assault. And then lastly, the kind of context of this in terms of women's participation in running, that increased numbers of women run, and this is increased following the pandemic in the context of the uptake in exercising outdoors. There has been some research done by non-academic sources. So this slide just shows a couple of those. Well, in fact, I think there are only two. There may be more, but these are the main two that we've come across. So Runner's World magazine conducted a survey in 2021 where they surveyed 2,000 female runners and found that 60% had experienced abuse and harassment, and 25% regularly experienced sexual abuse. And that led to thousands of women sharing their experiences of harassment, and still do, on social media, particularly on Instagram, with the hashtag Reclaim Your Run, which Runner's World kind of encouraged women to do, to share those experiences. In 2023, Adidas conducted some research, which was in several different countries, and found that 92% of women are concerned for their safety when they go for a run, and they launched a campaign called the Ridiculous Run campaign, that this is a clip of here, where the women are surrounded by cars and motorbikes, and there's a horse. You can't see it on here, but the kind of idea of that was, this is ridiculous, but so is the fact that this many women experience abuse while they're out running. And then in the wider context of coverage by the media are some very serious incidents and murders of women while they've been out running. Most recently, Laken Riley, who was murdered on the Georgia University campus on the 22nd of February after being kidnapped while out running. A suspect was charged early March, and it was an opportunistic killing. So kind of illustrating the gravity of that, and the just taking the opportunity to target a woman while she was out running. So in all of this context of research and policy and media, the current project aims are to look at the frequency and the nature of abusive incidents that are experienced by women that are recorded as crimes by the police. And I'll come on to tell you a little bit about the data in a minute. To look at data and knowledge around the lived realities of women runners, focusing on their experiences of abuse, their fear of abuse, and these kinds of everyday decision-making processes around running, which I'm a runner and Caroline is a runner, and I'm also a qualified run leader. And just from talking to women over the years, this kind of processes of making decisions, a lot of decisions when you go out for a run about where you go, who you go with, what you take with you, what time you go, form part of a gendered kind of decision-making that men mostly don't experience. And then, as I've said, the reporting of abuse and how they seek help and the barriers to that abuse. Then using this to consider preventive strategies and police responses to reported incidents. And then more widely, as I said at the beginning, to think about this in the longer term, about how we could understand women's experiences and then use this to talk to men and boys about and learn more about their attitudes. So we have three sources of data in the current project. So analysis of police data, as Jeff said, from GMP and Merseyside, which covered a 2-year period, which does include some of the lockdown period. So there was a lot of women running during that time. Focuses on recorded incidents of abuse experienced by women runners. We also conducted an online survey about women's experiences of abuse. So this was open to women living in Greater Manchester and Merseyside areas, and asked them questions about their experiences of abuse, their fear of these things happening, the factors that shaped their fear, the impact that this had on their running, and whether they'd reported any of this, and if not, then what the barriers were to that reporting. And then to add some depth and some qualitative aspects to the data, we had audio diaries, which were recorded by women runners across the areas about their experiences and fears of abuse. And we asked them when they got back from a run, they left us a voice note that was about, you know, today I went for a run, I went at this time of day because I was going with my friend and that was the only time she could go, or whatever it was. And they left us really quite interesting data that gave some further context to the other two data sources. So overall, this shows the police data from both areas, and in total there were 81 crimes recorded by the police across that 2-year period concerning the abuse of women runners, all of which were perpetrated by men. The most common two types were sexual offences and harassment. So the most common type of offence reported to the police was related to sexual offences, which was 41% of the 81 crimes. The next most common was causing harassment, alarm or distress, so a public order offences, and then physical assault, and then harassment, and 2 that were related to acquisitive crime. The age range of the women was 15 to 64, and the majority self-identified as British, although a lot of that data was missing, and we'll come back to the nationality and ethnicity in a little bit. Perpetrators of abuse were only identified in 29 of the 81 cases, and perpetrator was charged in 14 cases. During the data period, there was an operation in GMP called Operation Carbon, which you can have a look at online if you're interested in it. Shows you the outcome of that. But 12 of those charges were related to Operation Carbon and related to the same person. And I think the operation really shows the value of reporting what might be considered lower level experiences, and how the police can then use that to inform operations and kind of strategies to target people and what can be then done about it. And then lastly, we had very helpfully the help of a person in the university who mapped the offences, and we've got a couple of maps, well, 3 maps to show you, that show the variation in reporting across different districts. And I think that's obviously not that they're the districts that things are happening in, but there's something about the kind of patterns of reporting in different districts, and then how this is clustered around green spaces and waterways. So this one shows we only were able to do this for Greater Manchester because the number, I think we would, because there's only 20 incidents across Merseyside, so we felt like they might be a bit more identifiable. So for GMP, this is how they are distributed across the divisions. So some divisions have got none. There's a lot clustered there in Manchester, a lot of which relate to Operation Carbon, and some of which might relate to the diversity of people and their participation in running, which we'll come to a bit later on. The next map shows how these are clustered around waterways. So these are the canals and rivers in Greater Manchester, and you can again see that the incidents are often near the waterways. And then the last one shows a similar kind of picture, but clustered around green spaces. And I think that the last 2 maps together show that women choose to run in scenic spaces like I do, like lots of runners do. You want to run in a place that's nice, where there's not lots of traffic, along the side of a river or a canal or in a park. But then in these spaces, they experience quite serious incidents because these are the ones that get reported to the police. So their choice or their kind of want to run in places that are more scenic then sometimes can lead to this kind of victimisation. So I'm going to hand over to Caroline, who's going to talk more about the findings.
Thanks, Rose. So yes, I'm just going to talk briefly about the police data specific to the 2 police force areas, because the data that Rose presented was the collated police data. And then I'll move on to talking about the survey data and the audio diary data as well. So for Greater Manchester Police Force area, as Rose said, there were 61 offences recorded across the 2-year period. And as you can see in the table here, the majority of these were sexual offences, so 25, which equates to 41%, followed by public order offences, violence with or without injury, and then some harassment cases, robbery and theft, and then there was 1 rape as well. The sexual offences that are on there, all of the Operation Carbon offences would have been recorded as sexual offences, because the method that was used was somebody who was following women on a bike as they ran along the towpath and was hitting them on the bottom as he cycled past them running. So that's why for Greater Manchester we see that the biggest proportion of recorded offences were recorded as sexual offences. So the victims range between the ages of 16 to 64. So we can see this is something that affects women right throughout the life course. The majority self-identified as white British. And as Rose said, similar to the overall data, an offender was identified in 27 of those cases, and the majority of those were related to the Operation Carbon investigation. On this slide, we've just got some examples from the case notes from recorded offences in Greater Manchester, and this is to give you some examples of the kind of things we saw in the case files. So I'm not going to read all the quotes out. I'll give you a minute to have a read through those, but generally our research showed that there were a lot of different types of abuse that women experienced whilst out running, and lots of them, and this came across in the surveys as well, involved vehicles. So either women being shouted at from vehicles, or having objects thrown at them, or being spat at from men in vehicles. And also there was an issue that was raised a few times around scrambler bikes, especially off-road as well, where men were coming up to women and riding very closely to them and intimidating them in that way, which relates to that top quote. You can also see a quote around someone being followed, someone being flashed at. An example from the Operation Carbon one of a woman being hit on the bottom as she's been running from someone on a bike, and then somebody who's actually pulled a woman down to the floor and stood over her. So I'll just give you a minute to have a read through those. Okay, and then for Merseyside, as we said, there were only 20 offences recorded across Merseyside over the same 2-year period, and the majority of these were recorded as causing intentional harassment, alarm or distress, which accounted for half of those 20 cases. There were also some exposure cases, sexual assaults and harassment, and common assaults as well. And again, the victims' age range was from 15 to 59, so again, a really broad range of women who are being attacked or harassed in some way while they're out running. Again, the majority identified as white British. And in the Merseyside data, which we think is possibly more reflective, the offender was identified in just 2 of those cases, one of which the offender was summoned, and one of which the case was discontinued due to evidential difficulties. And this is part of the problem with women who are abused whilst out running, that it happens very quickly. If it's in a car, then it might be that the woman doesn't get the registration number or can't give many identifying details, and it's happened by the time she's got home and done anything about it. So these cases are particularly challenging in terms of identifying and evidencing as well. On this quote, again, I've got some examples of the incidents that were recorded by the police in Merseyside, and I'll let you read through these. But again, these are examples of a woman being followed, flashed at, and sexually assaulted as well. So I'll just give you a minute to read through those. Okay, so moving on from the police data to our survey data. So as Rhoda explained, we wanted to look at the police data to see what was recorded, and reported to the police. And then we wanted to more broadly find out what women's experiences were that weren't necessarily reported to the police, as we suspected that those that were reported to the police would be the more serious end of the continuum and would represent the tip of the iceberg. And so we advertised a survey very widely across Greater Manchester and across Merseyside, and had approximately 500 women respondents. 99% of the participants in the survey identified as cis women, and of those who provided data on their nationality and ethnicity, 91% identified as British and 92% as white. So we don't know if these figures are reflective of the women who run across Greater Manchester and Merseyside, or whether this is a reflection of the women who engaged with our survey. We did try to push the survey out across all areas, because we didn't just want to get certain sectors of society responding to the survey, but we did end up with a vast majority of women who responded to the survey, as you can see, identifying as white British. So we would like to learn a bit more about potential barriers to participation in running by non-white women in particular, and about their experiences of abuse, which might be intersectional abuse based on factors of race as well as age as well as sex. The largest proportion of the women were aged 41 to 50 years. Nearly half of them reported that they usually run on their own, and they tend to run either between 5 and 8 p.m. in the evening or before 8 a.m. in the morning, which is quite as expected. Oh, got interference there. Because this fits around kind of working and care responsibilities. Someone got their microphone on there. It's gone. And the majority of women reported running in built-up and residential areas. And again, we don't know if this is because it's in Manchester and Merseyside, which are obviously contain major cities, that this tends to be where the women live, or whether this is where women choose to run because this is where they feel safe. So this is just to give you an idea of what the women told us about their running routines who participated in the survey. So in terms of what they told us about their experiences of abuse and their fears around running, 68% of the women runners across Greater Manchester and Merseyside said that they had experienced some form of abuse whilst out running. And again, this was really varied in terms of the nature of it, but the most common thing that they reported in the survey was verbal abuse, being followed and intimidated by men, a lot of things again involving cars, and being flashed at, all by men. And so we saw less of the more serious end types of behaviours that were reported to the police across the survey data, and a lot more of the general harassment and intimidation being flashed at, all by men. 82% of the women said that they worried about their personal safety whilst out running, and we also asked them questions around what their key concerns were, and they didn't tell us that they were afraid of being catcalled or having someone shout something out of a van or even being followed. The fears that women expressed through the survey were really quite serious level fears of being attacked, being raped, being murdered. So women's level of fear is high in terms of the proportion of women that have a fear of being abused whilst out running, but it's also high in terms of the level of what they're actually fearful of. It's not that the more lower level end of things, it's the really serious offences, which we know do happen, although they are less common than the verbal abuse and the being followed, etc. As a result of their fears, and to make themselves feel safe or safer, many women said that they carried a variety of items when they went out running to make themselves feel more secure, and that included things like taking their mobile phones with them, carrying keys through their knuckles, carrying things like personal alarms, mace sprays, wearing air tags, being tracked by their friends or their family, and so they'd know where they were going running and what time they were expected home, etc. But most importantly, what really came through as a strong theme in the data was planning, this risk assessment and planning exactly when and where they run, what times of day or year it was safe to run along certain routes, if they were on their own compared to whether they were with somebody, and what they wear as well, so not wanting to draw attention to themselves. So that kind of risk assessment and needing to plan exactly when and where and who you run with was a really strong theme in the data. Of the women who had experienced abuse whilst out running, only 5% had reported their experiences to the police. which really shows just how, that it is just the tip of the iceberg, what we're seeing in the recorded offences. And we asked them why they hadn't reported things to the police. And again, they gave a variety of responses, but the most common reasons were that they often didn't think that what had happened to them constituted an offence. They didn't perceive it serious enough to bother the police with. They didn't know if the police would be interested in hearing about their experience or would take it seriously. They didn't think that the police would be able to do anything about it, especially if they weren't able to identify anything about the person who had done that, form of abuse to them. But also, again, perhaps the strongest theme was just this normalisation that the women said that they experienced various types of abuse so frequently whilst out running that it was just part and parcel of their experience as a woman runner, and they saw it as normal, and they didn't see any point at all in reporting it to the police. So the audio diary data gave us that more kind of in-depth data around women's day-to-day experiences, decision-making routines, around their running routines, and risk assessments again. And it showed up the same themes really that we'd got from the survey data, but in more depth. So again, women really kind of told us a lot about where they were running and how that related to the time of year it was. And the audio diaries were collected in kind of May, June, July, August kind of time. So it was all at summer. So the women were talking about it being lighter at this time of year. And so that meant that they could run in particular places where they would never run in winter. But it also brought about issues over what to wear. And there was a particularly hot spell. And some of the women in their audio diary said that they'd wanted to go out perhaps wearing shorts and a crop top or a running bra. But they wore more layers than they wanted to because they didn't want to draw any undue attention to themselves, didn't want to kind of invite comments, that kind of thing. So that feeling that they had to take responsibility for their own safety, but also for not wanting to draw any attention to themselves through what they wore. And again, practical precautions, including carrying various items with them, only wearing one earphone if they wanted to listen to music or podcasts so that they could hear what was going on around them. And then finally, they talked about safety in numbers. So the women, said that maybe they didn't really want to run in a running group. They preferred running on their own, but they did run as part of a running group as well, because that was where they felt the safest. And again, the strong theme that came through the audio diary data was this normalisation of abuse, as you can see in that final quote. This woman saying she didn't tell anybody about it, what happened to her, because they'd probably experienced things too, and it's just a way of life. So in terms of the key takeaways from our research, it takes us right back to the beginning. So Rose started off the presentation by talking about how 30 years ago, Betsy Stanko was talking about the endemic and enduring nature of the abuse of women in public spaces. So this happens to women everywhere. This isn't just in Merseyside and Greater Manchester. We know that this happens throughout the UK. We'd be really interested to do some research looking at international comparisons, but we know that this is a problem throughout the UK, and our project has had some media attention recently, and we've received lots and lots of contact from people and comments from women throughout the country who have very similar experiences. And as Rose said, this happens to women in public in a variety of different contexts. We were particularly interested in women who run because they are more often alone. They do tend to be wearing particular types of clothing, and that they ideally run at quieter times of day that fits around routines, or because they don't want to be running in busy areas around lots of people or past pubs, etc. So this is a problem that's not going away, and it is a problem that is really quite prolific. As I've said a few times, the abuse of that women experience whilst out running is very much normalised by women. They experience it as part of their everyday life. They completely see it and accept it as part and parcel of their lives. And part of that feeds into decisions not to report it to the police because they don't think it's a big issue, or they don't think it should be taken seriously. But regardless of that, it has a huge impact on their day-to-day experience as a runner. We don't know from this research whether some women don't run at all because of experiences of abuse. So we surveyed people we wanted to hear from regular runners. So we asked people to respond to the survey if they ran approximately 3 or more times a week. We don't know about the women who run once and never run again because they receive abuse. But what we do know is even the women who do run, they have really high levels of fear. fear of very serious offences, and that they take a number of precautions and do almost subconscious risk assessments in order to make themselves feel as safe as possible whilst out running. So we would like to take this forward into another project, which was always the aim of this project, to be an initial project just looking at women's experiences. We'd like to, there are so many different things we want to do with it now, but one of the things we want to do is to look at how we can work with boys and men and challenge some of the kind of attitudes that perhaps facilitate the abuse of women runners. And we'd also like to do some work where we learn more about the experiences of underrepresented groups who we didn't perhaps hear as much from through this research. So that's everything we have to say to you. I'll stop screen sharing. Okay.
Right. Yeah. Thank you, Rose and Caroline, for a really interesting presentation. I think obviously raises a lot of questions in terms of gaps that we don't know about and for future research. But I'll open it up for questions. So if you have a question, please put your hand up. While we're doing that, I have a quick question, which is in terms of, obviously, you've got a lot of key takeaways there. In terms of sort of short-term practical measures for the police forces in question, do you have data on times of these incidents which is of any use? Because quite clearly you've got what we may see as hotspots in terms of the type of places where these incidents are more likely to be reported, and obviously there can be a response to that in terms of putting patrols out there at certain times. I was wondering if you had any data on when it was more likely that these things happened.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, no, the police data did include, yes, it does include what time of day it was the abuse happened. So yeah, we do have that data. We haven't actually analysed it yet, have we?
No, I was just going to say we could ask, because that's one of the things, the mapping only came to us fairly late on in the project, but it's one of the things that she can do is to do some temporal mapping of kind of when things happened. So yeah, that would be useful.
Yeah, I mean, it does strike me that there are sort of short-term, both reassurances and potentially, prevention as well. But so do we? I can't see any hands up. Has anybody got a question for our presenters?
I think on that, just Jeff. Oh, go on.
No, go on, Rose.
I was just going to say, and I did mention it a little bit, but I think one of the, like Caroline said, one of the reasons that people don't report it is because they think it's not serious. But with the operation, which I think is a really good example, and we were fortunate to be able to have a chat to the officer that had set the operation up, and she just noticed that a few women were reporting something similar across a kind of geographical area. And so she put together the operation, but and on their own, maybe none of the things were, they weren't serious sexual assaults. They were sexual assaults, but they were what some people, I'm not saying that I think this, but some people might think, oh, I'm not reporting, it's not serious enough. But because they did, they were able to build up this picture and then find the person. So I think some of that is, women might think, oh, there's no point sharing it, but actually being able to create a picture of time or place or both together is really useful for police, and they can then act on that. So there's a kind of wider purpose. And I think, we've talked about the use of an app, maybe, that women can quickly share it because it's quite time consuming sharing it in full as a report to the police. But I know they've done similar things with Rika, who, Jeff, one of the women in our department, has done a similar kind of app for reporting incidents of abuse on transport in Greater London. So I think that kind of thing could be a useful place for women to share things, and that police can then start to look at patterns.
Okay, thanks, Rose. So we've got a question from Matt Turner. Matt.
Hello, thank you for the presentation. Really, really interesting. So I'm a police officer from the Met Police, on secondment to the Vaughan Task Force, where I'm the lead for Safer Spaces. But interestingly, I'm also an athletics coach and I run. So this is really, really interesting to me. I'm keen to be involved in any work going forward that you've got planned. But two things. First of all, have you shared your insight and findings with people like England Athletics or Parkrun? That's the first point.
Not yet.
Oh yeah,
Like, I don't know.
Well,
No, you go. I've talked loads.
No, it's fine. We shared it with Runners World, who then did a podcast, maybe, I don't know, 6 weeks ago. We can share the link with you actually. And they did a podcast on this issue, and they included our research as part of it, which was really well done. But no, and yeah, that's a really good idea. We are looking at how we can disseminate this to have as much impact as possible. So yeah, any recommendations are really welcome. And also, yeah, it would be great to be in touch with you about our future work. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. And then the second point, just to mention, in terms of highlighting areas of concern, you've got the Street Safe tool. So this is available via all police service websites, and it allows a member of the public to highlight a concern with a particular location due to environmental features or behavioural features. So if it happens to be, an area where they find it's dangerous to run because of lack of lighting or that type of feature, that can be reported and obviously shared to the council, etc., if appropriate. But it's also that behavioural element too. And I think you were saying about the combination of incidents. It's that type of system. If somebody doesn't want to report direct to the police in terms of a crime, that intelligence to highlight areas of concern is really, really important.
Yeah, exactly. It's that identifying of patterns and problems. And actually, the incidents in Greater Manchester, they spanned over Greater Manchester Police into Cheshire, didn't they? Because they were along a towpath as well. So it's not even a case of looking at one police force area. Actually, they were across 2 police force areas. And so collecting that data via an app that's not necessarily directly reporting it to the police is really useful in lots of different reasons, for different reasons.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Matt. And another question from Esther Pugh.
Good morning, hello. As you can see, or good afternoon, evening, I'm from Kent Police, as my background suggests. So I'm a detective sergeant. I'm also a runner as well. And we were actually looking at doing a bit of an initiative around advice and getting in contact with the running group in terms of getting some feedback from them and providing them with some advice and getting that link into people reporting. But we were struggling with having existing data as well around to sort of say this is where we should be targeting, this is where we should be going. So it's really, really useful having listened to obviously your presentation around what you found and holds a little bit more weight for some of the things that we want to try and do. And I was just curious as to where perhaps we could maybe get a copy of your findings and whether that was going to be published, and how we could sort of stay in touch with you for that, because I'd approached Athletic England myself around getting some advice from them, because they've got a web page with useful tips and tools, which, like you say, women shouldn't have to do these things in order to go running, but they did have some advice out there, so it was just sort of a platform for us to link in with them. So yeah, so it was just about getting some of the data together that you'd obviously already got in perhaps a summary or something to help us present to obviously our chief officers to get some work put into this.
Yeah,
so we've got the...
go on. I've put our emails in the... No, you go. I've put our emails in the chat, so please feel free to get in touch with us. I was going to ask Jeff, actually, is the report hosted somewhere, Jeff or Helen?
Yes, the report. Yeah, no, great question. The report is on our website. So Helen's putting the URL into the chat at the moment. So all of our small grant reports, we sort of synthesized down into a 4-page document, which have all the contact details. And we will also, if we hear of publications that follow on, we usually let people know about that through our Twitter account as well.
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, I can see that people are sharing it. So our final report for the project is up on the website, and then we have done a briefing paper of all the police findings, and then we've got 2 separate reports on the Merseyside and the GMP data. So we have got various different formats, and we're in the process of writing a more academic journal article that we published as well. Just in terms of data, what you were saying about trying to collate data on it, it wasn't the easiest. And this is one of the questions we had when we first proposed this project was, well, how are you going to find the police data on it? Because it's not flagged, obviously, as any particular type of offence. And so we did have to work quite carefully, and we had a lot of support from both people at Merseyside and GMP, from the data extraction side of things, in what terms to search for, and we did have to do quite a lot of manual searching and getting rid of all the, like, because we searched for like joggers and runners, and then obviously it brought up lots of people wearing joggers, or drug runners, or people running away from people or running towards things. So it wasn't the easiest of processes, and it did involve manually going through lots and lots of different cases to just have a look at them and exclude the ones that weren't relevant. But it did enable us. We were able to do it at the end of the day.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, we'd be happy to have a chat about it more. If you want to email us, we can arrange to meet and stuff. But yeah, sounds really good.
Perfect. Thank you.
I can visualize those reports that you were scrolling through. I'd say great piece of research. So Anna has a question. So Anna, do you want to come on?
Hello. Great piece of research. Well done. It's really good to have it out there. And I didn't know before, had read the summary report, but I hadn't seen the crossover with the hotspots with the green spaces. So I think that's a really interesting angle to pursue together. Give my work on safer parks. But I was interested in what you felt was coming out from women in terms of what they wanted. To obviously want freedom and they want to feel safe, but apart from that burden on themselves, which you talked about, all the kind of activities they're doing, all the safety work activities that they're doing, what was the main thing, I was wondering, that was coming out from their diaries as to what might change this, or their interviews?
I think that's a really interesting question, and I think a lot of the things, like you said, women want to be able to just go for a run without having to make a million plans for it, and like think about lots of things, just to be able to go when and where they want to go and in what they want to wear. I think a lot of the responses that we've had have been about things like, not in the survey, but responses to the actual research of, I'm so glad somebody seems to be doing something about this, because there is focus, there's loads of research on various different types of abuse and catcalling and things, but not of runners. And a lot of the response has been, I'm so glad that someone's highlighting this, because this is a particular issue for runners, which was good for us to hear, because I think at the beginning people were saying, well, what about people that are out for a walk? What about this? What about this? And it's not to diminish their experiences, but I think there is, like we've said, something specific about this group of people. So I think some of it is the awareness raising, which I know is a bit kind of woolly, but just feeling like that it's being brought up. But I think the next thing has to be engaging with men and boys about it, and whether or not that's what, I don't know if that's, I think being able to challenge it. And I know a lot of this overlaps with the bystander training that's coming up in various spaces at the moment, but I think some kind of discussions about that, because chats that I've had with men, because obviously this is not all men at all, and chats with male runners that go, what can I do? Is there anything I can do? If, what could I do if there's a situation I come across it? Is it, I don't want to feel like I'm rescuing someone. What is it that's best to do? So I think there's some mobilisation of the wider running community. Anything, I don't know, anything to add, Caroline?
No.
Thanks,
okay,
Joanne,
thank
really
you.
useful.
So Helen's got a question. I'll hand over to her and she'll close down the meeting, because I've got to dash and do some teaching. But thanks again to Rose and to Caroline and to GMP and to Merseyside Police for producing this work. And I'll hand over to Helen.
Thanks, Joe.
Sorry, just make sure the sound's actually working. Hi, yeah, I was just wondering, because you're saying about this is a particular issue for runners seem to like bring people out the woodwork who I know there is sort of like broader like philosophical sociological work on like what is the psychology behind men kind of viewing women using public spaces and maybe particularly doing something active as illegitimate or as like cause for comment or as something where it like legitimizes their harassment in some way. Like one of the examples you used in your report was like a group of men stood outside a pub, and like I know if I was out for a run and if I saw like a group outside a pub, I'd probably cross over, and you just kind of minimize that. I just wonder if there's anything around, there's been any work around translating that to communications, kind of like challenging that idea at almost a fundamental level of kind of, because it is insane and ridiculous when you stop to think about it, is like, why are you so astonished to see a woman? Like, are you so sheltered? And so like what world do you live in where it's unusual to see a woman? Like, so there's that. And then the other kind of, the way you were talking about the usefulness of the reporting to the police and being able to like put together an operation and sort of be able to allocate, we're getting consistent reports about some harassment in this area, or send someone with patrol, look into it that way. From my perspective, I suppose I hadn't thought about like how a report could be useful, even if you're not going to get like a, even if you don't want to have like a whole long follow-up and have to like, like no one wants to have to go through like court proceedings because they got wolf whistled. But maybe there's again some communications to do with runners in the running community around, if something like this happens, it's worth reporting. Don't worry, we're not going to drag you through a whole process. It just helps us to know where to put resources. So I was wondering if you'd seen much around the communications on either of those two things, like the challenging that sort of fundamental idea of why is this an odd thing? why does this legitimate a response? And also the getting people to report.
We need to come up with a plan of answering questions, especially when we're online. I think with the first point, this is why we'd like to do something interdisciplinary, because I think, and I've seen, I've got 2 children that they've finished primary school now, but they had education type things about inequalities and just about things that are appropriate to say, and obviously it starts so early and it's so embedded. And I think, that's not an area that I don't know a lot about, and it would be really good to work with some people in education that could look at that kind of engagement, because once you've got someone like the person that was convicted in Op Carbon, that's a bit later down the line, and you can do some useful things to understand attitudes of boys and men, and there is research around that of like these kinds of attitudes that allow people to behave like this. So there's that, but intervening in that goes right back to early years education, I think, and the kinds of how you do that. But that is just so tricky when it's maybe not reflected on a on a societal level as well.
But also, I think that's why we want to do something international, because you're right, yes, that it does seem that women generally and women runners are fair game for, making comments, doing what you want, saying what you want. But from what we've heard there's some Strava data that we've been trying to get hold of internationally, and which suggests that, the UK is actually one of the worst countries for this. And for example, in Scandinavia, it's not such an issue. So we'd like to do something international, because this is a cultural issue at the end of the day, in terms of the acceptability of it and the responsibilisation of women. So I think that is definitely something we'd like to explore further. Yeah, and you're right, what you said about reporting to the police. It's not just about the successful outcome for that individual, it's about identifying patterns. And the police were really interested from day one in potential escalation. So are the people who are doing this, are they also involved in other types of abuse? Are they abusive to partners, or is it escalating to more serious levels of sexual assault? And we know, there's evidence around following and exposure in particular that actually they might be linked to other types of offending. So this is why, it's something that's really important to raise awareness of, as you said, around running communities, about the importance of recording this, whether that is reporting it directly to the police or recording it somewhere so that this can be kind of documented, pattern trends can be identified.
Yeah, and that was something we did, a GMP evidence-based policing just internal meeting yesterday, and that was something that they were really interested in, is how can we use this to kind of make some communications of, it might just be one report, but actually if we're able to build those up, we get a picture that can then lead to this. And they were also looking back at Up Carbon and thinking, could the comms from that have been better in terms of showing a successful outcome of a load of different information coming together.
But I think that does link back to what Matt was saying earlier about, working with, park run, maybe athletics, and raising awareness in those kind of forums and encouraging people to report it as well, because clearly there is an issue with non-reporting for understandable reasons. But yeah,
it is such a difficult thing as well, because it's with the comms, you don't want to sort of make the experience or the risk of being harassed like central to the experience of running, because it's like if people go to relax or something, you turn up at park run, it's like you have to hear more about like women keep getting harassed. I'm like, yeah, I came here maybe to not think about it. So yeah, I do appreciate it's a tricky one. I was imagining maybe a comms campaign where it was maybe a gender reversed one, like a group of women stood outside a pub and a male runner comes past, and like, just kind of making it ridiculous in some way. But yeah, that was really interesting. Thanks ever so much. We are a minute ahead of time, so if anyone's got any last questions, please do raise your hand. Nope. Okay. That's great. But thanks ever so much for your time. Really interesting report. Yeah, obviously got loads of ideas of where to take it, and great to see some interest from stakeholders in the chat wanting to collaborate and take it further. Anna Baker's work on parks, we've done something with before, and it'd be great to see those things coming together. Hopefully not with just more light pollution everywhere. But yeah.
Thanks very much.
Yeah, but that's brilliant. So thanks ever so much, everybody, especially to Rose and Carolyn. If you've got any questions about N8 PRP, please do get in touch with myself or Jeff. Our emails are on the N8 PRP website. If you've got any questions for Caroline and Rose, their emails are in the chat. I'm going to put the recording of this onto our YouTube channel and link it to the report page on the website. So I'll send a tweet out once that's happened, and I'll try and send an email to everyone who's registered on Eventbrite as well, although my Eventbrite is playing up at the moment, so we'll see if that happens. But brilliant. Okay, well, thanks ever so much, everyone, and have a good afternoon.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.